Welcome to the Mini Book Podcast, African American Books Edition.
Today, we're focusing on some really powerful excerpts from the memoir Assata, an autobiography by Assata Shakur.
This is such an essential text. It's not just an autobiography, really. It functions more like a primary source document for understanding the Black liberation movement in the U.S.
And just as importantly, the massive state effort to suppress it, it's a view from the inside.
That's right. And our goal here is to really extract the essential story of this life, a life that was just fundamentally shaped by resistance.
It's a journey that takes us all over, from her childhood in segregated Wilmington, North Carolina, right into the heart of the movement.
And through intense political imprisonment and eventually to international political exile in Cuba. We're going to try and unpack the complex political philosophy, the history, and the immense personal struggle in these pages.
And for you, the listener, I think it's important to understand this requires setting aside the official portrait of Assata Shakur, the one on the FBI's most wanted list. Instead, you have to try and see the world through her eyes, the eyes of someone who sees that entire system as fundamentally criminal and oppressive.
In that perspective, it shapes every single word of this memoir. It starts immediately. It thrusts us right into a moment of extreme violence and trauma.
Okay, so let's get into that opening. The book doesn't ease you in. It starts right in the aftermath of a shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike in 1973.
Chapter 1 is so visceral. It just immediately establishes the shocking physical trauma she's going through. And that really sets the tone for the entire book.
Yeah, the description of the physical agony is immediate. She talks about being dragged across the pavement by her feet.
Just dragged.
And feeling this terrible burning sensation across her chest, a sensation that made her believe, in that moment that her arm had been shot clean off.
It's terrifying. She says she was convinced her arm was just hanging inside her shirt by a few strips of flesh. Her blouse, she says, was soaked purple with blood.
And what's so chilling about this is that the physical pain is immediately compounded by this calculated cruelty from the authorities.
The minute she's in that ambulance, the psychological torture begins. Before she's even gotten any real medical treatment.
That's the critical point, isn't it? This wasn't just neglect, it was calculated abuse. It was designed to break her further.
She's writhing in pain. She can't even scream because of the injury to her chest.
And the police officers are mocking her. She recalls them saying things in this, sweet, taunting voice. Where does it hurt? Here, here, here.
And every time they'd say here, the ambulance would deliberately hit a bump or something just to maximize her pain.
It just establishes the police as this actively cruel force, not just indifferent, they are antagonists from the very first page.
And this whole environment, this pain and the psychological games, it forces her into a life or death decision about her own identity.
Absolutely. So they get her to the hospital, and a nurse is trying to get her name for treatment to contact her family.
But Assata is terrified. She's just silent.
She believes, with total conviction, that if they knew who she was, Assata Shakur, a known Black revolutionary, they wouldn't just treat her poorly.
They would kill her.
They would kill her outright.
So she resists giving her name because she knows her political identity is basically a death sentence in that situation. But she needs a lawyer. How does she deal with that?
She understands that legal help is her only path to survival. She has to contact her lawyer, Evelyn.
So she makes a compromise.
A painful one. She decides to give the nurse what she calls her slave name, Joanne Deborah Byron.
Wow.
It's a bitter choice, recognizing that the name she was born with, which doesn't carry the revolutionary weight of Assata Shakur, might just buy her enough time to get a lawyer before the state can really move against her.
So her very name becomes a weapon for survival.
Her identity is a political tool, absolutely.
But then, and this is where it gets so profound, amidst all this chaos and hostility, the hospital is crawling with police. There's this one small moment of human solidarity that just cuts through all of it.
It's one of the most memorable details in the whole book. The Black hospital security guard.
Yes.
She sees him walk up to her bed, and unlike all the police and the troopers, he doesn't have that hostile glare. And as he walks away, he just discreetly clenches his fist and gives her the power sign.
That gesture, that tiny nonverbal act of recognition, it must have felt like a lifeline.
It was almost like a medicine. She says she felt instantaneously better. It wasn't just sympathy, it was recognition.
Someone saw her not as a criminal, but as a comrade.
Exactly. It confirmed that the system of control wasn't, monolithic, that these little pockets of resistance and solidarity existed even in the most dangerous places. That one moment gave her so much spiritual strength.
And speaking of controlled environments, the contradictions of where they hold her are just shocking. After all this, she's put in this seemingly luxurious place called the Johnson Suite.
The Johnson Suite. It's described as almost ridiculous for her situation. A huge hospital room, private sitting room, a den, a full bathroom.
Sounds like a five-star hotel.
Right, a recovery paradise. But the reality was that all that luxury was just a stage for her imprisonment.
So what was the reality?
She was immediately handcuffed by one leg to the side rail of the bed. It forced her into this painful, contorted position where she couldn't even stretch out.
So the luxury was just a grotesque joke, a way to say, even in comfort, we control you completely.
And that control was magnified by this intense paranoia from the authorities. The hospital was, in her words, saturated with state troopers.
Why? What were they so afraid of?
They were listening to the police radio, and they were completely fueled by this assumption that somebody is going to try and break me out.
So that belief led to nonstop surveillance.
Nonstop. And they refused to let her see her lawyer or her family. And when she asked about them, she says she was often met with obscene responses. It was all about isolating her and demoralizing her.
The psychological warfare then hits this really bizarre peak. A detective corners her and gives this rambling racist lecture.
It's a critical moment because it's where the state's ideology is just laid bare. No filter. This detective goes on, basically giving a philosophical justification for the violence they were inflicting on her.
What was he even saying?
He was insisting that if white people had just maintained control, he references various wars, the world wouldn't be in such a mess. And that no good niggers like her wouldn't be shooting state troopers.
He wasn't just insulting her. He was trying to justify the entire project of Western imperialism right there in her hospital room.
That's it, exactly. He goes into this long pseudo-historical rant about the glories of white empires, Roman, Greek, Spanish, British, insisting the white race invented everything because they were just smarter and worked harder.
As disturbing as that is, for her, it must have just confirmed everything she already believed.
It did. It confirmed she wasn't just fighting a few bad cops. She was fighting a monolithic ideology of white supremacy that was baked into the very foundations of state power.
She says she had to bite her tongue to stop from arguing. But she found a different way to resist, a silent way. She calls it intellectual escape.
And this is maybe the most powerful form of resistance in the whole book. The ability to keep your mind and spirit free even when your body is in chains. A nurse, who she calls a godsend, brought her 3 books.
And these books became her armor.
Mental armor. The first was a book of Black poetry.
And she didn't just read it to herself, she weaponized it.
That's the key. She would read poems like Invictus and Paul Laurence Dunbar's If We Must Die over and over again out loud.
So the guards could hear her.
Exactly. This wasn't a private hobby. It was an audible, defiant message to her captors. The words of resistance became a sound barrier, signaling that her spirit was completely unbroken.
That's just incredible. The other books offered different kinds of strength, right? The novel Siddhartha.
Yeah, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse offered her a path to detachment. In a world that was all concrete and steel and hate, the novel helped her find a kind of peace, a unity with all living things.
A spiritual escape.
She describes softly saying Om to herself, meditating, and feeling connected to the sun, the birds, the trees outside. It lifted her above the manacles in the basement.
And the third book, Black Women in White America, provided historical context.
It connected her own suffering to something much, much larger. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, she wasn't an anomaly. She was part of a long, resilient tradition of struggle by Black women in America.
So it de-isolated her. It transformed her personal trauma into a part of a historical struggle.
Exactly. Together, those 3 books allowed her to build an impenetrable mental fortress.
And that fortress, that ability to resist, it didn't just come from nowhere. It was built on a foundation laid by her family, which takes us back to her childhood in Wilmington, North Carolina.
It's fascinating how the small personal rules of her household became the blueprint for her later revolutionary politics. Her grandparents taught self-respect not as, some abstract idea, but as a practical, minute-by-minute strategy for survival.
Survival in a deeply hostile, segregated world.
Right. And the rules for how to engage with white people were strict and non-negotiable.
These weren't suggestions, were they? They were direct commands for a child.
Ironclad commands, enforced with the threat of having their heads knocked off their shoulders.
What were the rules?
Absolutely no mississippi, saying yes ma'am and yes sir to white people. They had to look white people directly in the eye, hold their head up high, and speak clearly.
Whispering or looking down at your shoes was seen as submission.
An act of submission, yes. The ultimate lesson, the core ethos of her family, was a total rejection of required deference.
And that ethos was summed up in one line.
Don't you respect nobody that don't respect you. That was the core lesson. It taught her self-worth, autonomy at a very young age.
And it gave her the foundation to later reject the entire American system, because that system clearly never respected her or her people.
She learned to spot disrespect instantly and reject it on a fundamental level.
This insistence on dignity was a necessity in segregated Wilmington, which they called Bop City.
In the 1950s South, segregation was absolute. Black people were forbidden from using countless public places, including the beach.
So her grandparents became entrepreneurs out of necessity.
They had to. They owned land and they built a business on it. A restaurant, lockers for changing, a dance area, all because the Black community had literally nowhere else to go. Bop City became this vital, independent community hub.
But even on their own land, they were still under constant threat, what she calls the real live ghosts.
It's such a powerful metaphor for that constant looming threat of white supremacist violence. The phantoms of the parking lot, as she calls them, were white citizens.
The Klan, basically.
She implies they were Klan-like, yes. They would drive around their dirt lot at breakneck speeds, shouting horrible racist insults, curses, even firing guns in the air.
Just to show their rage that Black people dared to own a business and enjoy themselves.
It's an exhausting, terrifying way to live. The memoir talks about how her grandfather would just quietly, without saying a word, go inside and get his gun.
A constant state of readiness.
It was. The silence of him getting the gun was more profound than any shouting match. It was a recognition that their safety, their dignity, their property always required armed self-defense. That was the America she grew up in.
And those threats became really crushing, formative experiences when she was outside of that family bubble. The story about the zoo and the amusement park is just defining.
That denial, it shaped her entire worldview. She was denied access to the public zoo, the simple joy of a merry-go-round, and the reason was delivered so bluntly. Because we were Black.
A child never forgets that, the clarity of that exclusion.
Never. It taught her that her status in America was fixed, and in the eyes of the law and the culture, it was inferior.
Which leads to this complicated moment where her mother tries to get around the rules, and it teaches Assata a whole other painful lesson about how racism works.
Right. In a desperate attempt to get into the amusement park, to shield her kids from that defeat, her mother starts speaking to the ticket lady in a foreign language.
Implying they were Puerto Rican or Cuban.
Exactly. And because the ticket lady assumed they were non-native minorities, she let them in.
So the ticket taker granted access based on a perceived non-American identity.
Which taught Assata a bitter and lasting lesson, that non-native minorities had more rights and respect than American-born Blacks.
So racism isn't just a simple wall. It's a complex hierarchy of oppression.
A cruel introduction to intersectional politics, learned through total humiliation as a child.
And speaking of complex systems, the memoir goes into the devastating impact of internalized racism within the Black community at that time.
This is such a crucial part of the book. It shows how structural racism just seeps into the psyche of the oppressed. She details all these practices of trying to change your appearance to fit a white ideal.
Skin bleaching creams, trying to get straighter hair.
The desire for Shirley Temple curls, yes. But the most heartbreaking detail is the girl she knew who wore a clothespin on her nose, desperately trying to make it thinner.
It just shows the depth of the self-loathing that the dominant culture imposes.
They were taught, implicitly and explicitly, that whiteness was superior, and it led to these painful physical attempts at self-modification.
She also defines this self-deprecating term she heard growing up, CPT.
CPT, it stands for Colored People's Time. And it was a term used inside the Black community to describe the perceived laziness or untimeliness of Black people.
So the community itself was reinforcing the stereotype.
To some degree, yes. It's a profound example of how oppression uses the language of the oppressed to enforce its own ideas. It damages self-perception from the inside out, which makes resistance so much harder.
And all of this foundation of critical awareness, informed her later critique of the American history she was taught in school.
She draws this powerful contrast between the myths they taught and the reality she later uncovered.
Like the George Washington story.
Exactly. She's in this heroic school play about George Washington and the cherry tree, singing that he never told a lie, and then as an adult, she learns that Washington once sold a human being, a slave, for a keg of rum.
The clash between the myth and the reality is brutal.
It showed her that the Revolutionary War wasn't for universal freedom. It was for the economic freedom of rich whites, at that. She realized the whole education system wasn't about developing critical thought.
What was it about then?
Its goal was to deliver fragments of unrelated knowledge, simple trivia, to produce fragmented thinkers who were easy to manipulate and couldn't connect theory to practice.
But that fragmented system couldn't hold someone like her, who had already learned these hard, unified lessons from her grandparents.
Yeah.
And that brings us to her political awakening.
Right. The transition from the segregated South to the political streets of the North was intense. After she escaped a difficult home life, she's introduced to street survival. She learns the five-finger discount shoplifting from a neighborhood mother.
And that mother framed it not as theft, but as a political act.
It was a fascinating justification. She said it wasn't stealing, it was a necessary discount that the poor were taking back from exploitative stores that were already robbing their communities blind. It was survival economics.
But the real intellectual turning point seems to be her Aunt Evelyn's influence.
Her Aunt Evelyn was a critical lifeline. She exposed her to museums, art, intellectual culture, and this curiosity gets crystallized in college.
That's when she realizes the education system is designed to manipulate people.
And her mission becomes singular, to bridge the gap between theory and the raw, lived reality of oppression, to unite theory with practice.
And her study of history leads her to take aim at one of the biggest myths American education relies on, the figure of Abraham Lincoln.
This section of the book is just a devastating revision of American history. She was taught the standard story, the Civil War was to free the slaves, but she learns the true motivations were overwhelmingly economic.
A fight for control between Northern industrialists and Southern slave owners.
And the abolition of slavery was, in her words, only incidental to that larger economic fight.
And Lincoln's own documented words reveal a huge contradiction between the myth of the great emancipator and the actual man.
His own words confirm her analysis. His famous reply to Horace Greeley, where he says his paramount objective is to save the Union and is not either to save or destroy slavery.
The Union came first, always.
But it gets darker. She learned he was a firm believer in the massive exportation of Black people, proposing they be forcibly deported to Liberia or the Caribbean.
He couldn't envision a multiracial America where Black people were equals.
He actively refused to consider making Black people politically and socially our equals. For Assata, learning this wasn't just history trivia. It was the final, undeniable proof that the American system was structurally racist, designed not just to oppress, but to expel Black people.
And this clarity fuels her complete rejection of her birth name.
And her embrace of a new revolutionary identity. Joanne Chesimard becomes Assata Shakur.
It's a beautiful act of self-definition. Each name has a meaning.
Assata means she who struggles, Olubala is love for the people, and Shakur, which means the thankful, she took in respect for her comrade, Zaid Shakur. It's a political and spiritual rebirth.
To understand the resistance she embraced, we have to define what the Black Liberation Army, the BLA, actually was, according to her. Because the state had a very different definition.
This is a vital point. The state defined the BLA as a criminal terror group. Assata defines it differently, not as a singular, centralized organization, but as a concept, a people's movement, an idea.
It emerged organically from the conditions on the ground.
Spontaneously. Across the country, Black people were facing intolerable conditions: police brutality, poverty, horrible medical care. The BLA was the community's collective resistance to this ongoing low-grade war being waged against them.
And the state's response to this was extreme, systematic repression, all under a clandestine FBI program. We have to talk about COINTELPRO.
You cannot understand this period or Assata's life without understanding COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. This was the FBI's secret illegal operation to neutralize and destroy the Black liberation movement.
And the tactics went far beyond just surveillance.
Oh, way beyond. They actively tried to destroy groups from within. They planted fake letters to create mistrust, turned members against each other, fabricated evidence, and even organized targeted assassinations. The state was committing the actual crimes.
And she describes an instance where she unwittingly became part of a government sham and it showed her how sophisticated the plot against her people really was.
It's a fascinating detail. She was working at a black employment agency and helped organize a corporate hiring conference for qualified black personnel.
She was proud of it at first.
And then a black executive told her the truth. The companies were only participating to keep their government contracts, which required them to look for diverse candidates. The law didn't say they had to hire anyone.
So the whole thing was a performative fraud.
A complete sham. She realized with fury that she'd been an unwitting part of a plot that allowed corporations to maintain racist hiring practices while looking like they were doing the right thing. It showed her the opposition was subtle, bureaucratic, and everywhere.
That sense of betrayal just sets the stage for her return to confinement, which was defined by deliberate psychological and physical torment.
Her time in the Middlesex County Jail was an exercise in sensory deprivation, specifically designed to break her spirit. She was held in the basement under constant 24-hour surveillance.
And the details of the cell itself, they sound like a form of torture.
They engineered her environment for maximum discomfort. Her bed was nailed to the floor in the center of the cell so she couldn't move out of the guard's line of sight, and they kept the light on constantly.
Day and night. That's a recognized torture technique.
It is. It disrupts sleep, causes disorientation, and when her lawyer finally intervened, the jail replaced the constant light with something almost worse.
What was that?
A massive floodlight that would turn on and off every 10 or 15 minutes all night long, an intermittent, unpredictable light torture. It ensured she never got any real rest.
And yet, despite all this, she maintains her dignity. She refuses to participate in forced inmate labor.
That refusal is a powerful political statement. When she was told to snap string beans, she asked how much she'd be paid. They said nothing, so she refused, saying, "I don't work for nothing. I ain't gonna be no slave for nobody."
And she draws this larger conclusion about the real purpose of the prison system.
She sees prisons not just as punishment, but as institutions designed to legally perpetuate slavery. They provide free labor, and more importantly, they contain politically aware and socially conscious inmates who threaten the system.
The emotional core of this period, though, is the shocking discovery that she was pregnant while in custody.
The discovery itself was cruel. She didn't learn from a doctor. She learned from her lawyer, Ray Brown, who got the results in a report to the judge.
And when the pregnancy was finally confirmed, the medical staff's reaction was cold.
The prison doctor, when faced with her pains and a threatened miscarriage, immediately advised her to abort the baby. He said it would be better for her, better for everyone else. It felt less like medical advice and more like a political suggestion.
And the conditions of her confinement just intensified the risk to her and the baby.
Immense stress. Even in the hospital, she was initially chained by one leg to the bedpost. Her lawyer had to intervene, and during labor, the most vulnerable moment, she had 2 policewomen stationed inside the labor room with her.
They refused to grant her even the privacy of childbirth.
The state was always present, always in control.
But amidst all this hostility, she found moments of solidarity with other political prisoners.
Those connections were vital. She met Lolita Lebron, the Puerto Rican nationalist who had endured years of profound isolation but remained so strong. That gave her strength.
But she also had to confront the enemy within the prison walls, the Nazis.
She was, for a time, the only black woman in the unit alongside members of the Aryan Sisterhood. She realized she had to set boundaries immediately for her own safety.
She confronted them directly.
Told them she was ready to defend herself, that if anyone's mother was going to cry over violence, it would be theirs, not Miss Johnson, her mother. It was brutal, effective, and necessary. They stayed away.
If the pregnancy was a physical vulnerability, the true excruciating cost of her imprisonment is revealed during a visit with her 4-year-old daughter, Kikuya.
This is maybe the most gut-wrenching moment in the whole book. Kikuya was distant, visibly suffering from the separation. Assata's mother whispers to her, "Tell her to try to open the bars."
Just to distract her.
And Kikuya's reaction is just a microcosm of the whole struggle. She starts kicking and pulling and yanking on the bars of the visitation booth until she just collapses on the floor in resignation.
A child's hope, just crushed by steel.
That physical expression of defeat, it hit Assata with the force of a revelation. She realized the separation was doing irreparable damage. She said she went back to her cage and cried until she vomited.
That moment, that recognition of the damage, it fuels the next chapter of her life.
Yeah.
The escape. What gave her the conviction to even attempt something so dangerous?
It connects right back to her family. Her grandmother had a powerful dream that she was dressing Assata. And her grandmother was adamant, "You're coming home soon. You're getting out of here." That deep-seated cultural conviction gave her the emotional anchor she needed.
And when the escape finally happens, the experience of freedom is almost overwhelming.
After years in a sensory-deprived basement, the outside world just hits her with this massive force. Everything was super intense. Smells, sounds, colors were all magnified.
There's a painful self-consciousness, too.
Yeah, she felt rigid, like the steel of the jail had worked its way into her body. She was terrified that prison had made her ugly.
But this disorientation settles into a new political understanding.
The conclusion she drew was that revolution is a science, not just romantic idealism. She realized that survival and success required a higher level of political sophistication. It needed to be a rigorous, disciplined science.
And that understanding leads us to her life in exile in Cuba, where she gains this critical new worldview.
The contrast between the U.S. system she fled and the Cuban reality was immediate and stark. She saw free medical and dental care, free schooling at all levels, rent capped at about 10% of salary.
And no taxes, right?
No income, city, federal, or state taxes deducted from salaries. It illustrated a fundamentally different economic system, one that prioritized social stability.
And this lack of visible poverty was so profound that her Cuban neighbors didn't even believe her stories about the U.S.
They literally accused her of lying. She'd tell them about hunger, people sleeping in the streets, child prostitution in the U.S., and they would say, "Es mentira, it's a lie."
They couldn't believe such conditions could exist in a rich country.
It highlights the success of U.S. propaganda, but also the fundamental moral failure of the U.S. system in caring for its own people. For her, it was seeing a functional alternative.
And her exile also gave her this crucial international political clarity. She started connecting U.S. domestic oppression to its actions globally.
Seeing the real human costs of U.S. foreign policy firsthand solidified everything. In Cuba, she met torture victims, saw Namibian children who had survived massacres, all getting free medical treatment from the Cuban government.
It connects distant policy to tangible suffering.
She linked U.S. foreign policy bombing hospitals, supporting death squads, to the real human costs sitting right there in front of her. She realized the system was global, and her struggle had always been part of that global fight.
And even in exile, the U.S. state continued its war on her family back home.
The harassment was relentless. Her mother suffered a heart attack from the constant police badgering. Her Aunt Evelyn's office phone had 10 intercepts on it.
They used psychological tactics, too.
Sending phony notes in her handwriting, trying to lure the family into traps. It was a systematic effort to ensure her family paid a long-term price for her resistance.
And it took them years just to get her daughter's birth certificate.
10 years. A multi-year legal battle just for a birth certificate. It shows the state's commitment to destabilizing every aspect of her life and her child's life long after she was gone.
This all brings us to her final summary of her case. What was her ultimate realization about the American justice system?
She realized definitively that she was a political prisoner, not a common criminal. She was targeted under COINTELPRO for her activism.
And that changed how she saw her own trial.
She concluded that participating in the New Jersey trial was a mistake, a tactical error. She felt it gave legitimacy to what she saw as a political sham.
So what was the answer?
Her final conclusion is crucial. The people are our only appeal. The only ones who can free us are ourselves.
We've covered so much ground. From the foundation of dignity in segregated Wilmington through the debunking of American myths, the profound trauma of her arrest and imprisonment, and finally the clarity she gleaned in exile.
The core conflict throughout is this tension, isn't it? The tension between a system of entrenched systemic racism that criminalizes dissent and one individual's fierce fight to define her own worth, her own history, her own destiny.
Her story is just a profound challenge to all those official narratives. We've seen how she used her mind to survive and how the suffering of her daughter became the final catalyst for action.
And that struggle for the future is captured perfectly in that statement she made in her defense. We are pregnant with freedom. We are a conspiracy.
That is such a provocative thought to end on. What does it even mean to be pregnant with freedom in a world that constantly tries to deny you that birth?
It forces you to see the struggle not just as a fight for the present, but as the work required to ensure the next generation can be born free.
A freedom not chained to the oppression of the past? That is something worth struggling for.
The conspiracy isn't against the law. It's a conspiracy for liberation.
We thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing for future content. We would encourage you to go out and purchase Assata, an autobiography, and support the author.